I'm Craig Johnson, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thorpe,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Craig Johnson.
It's episode 252 of the Author Stories Podcast. Author interviews with the very best folks in publishing today. Whether it's indie, traditional publishing, hybrid, no matter what, we talk to them all from all across the spectrum of genre to bring you the very best in the craft of writing. It's because of our great sponsors that we're able to bring you these excellent shows, and I'd like to thank some of those sponsors today. If you would like to sponsor the show, go to hankgarner.com, and there's a link in the menu that says advertise. Click on that, and you can help sponsor the show as well. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, my very favorite monthly publication. If you want that old pulp magazine feel that you used to get when you were a kid, Tales from the Canyons of the Damned is the book for you. They're up to episode 19 now, the Halloween issue, and you're going to love it. Each month features a different set of writers bringing you the best in weird, pulpy stories. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. Go pick it up today. From my friend Nick Breaker, Essence, Book 1, Septima. Nick Breaker is one of the best science fiction writers out there today, and this new series that he's working on is crazy good. It mixes urban fantasy and science fiction and extraterrestrials in a great mix that delivers a story that's adventure with a little steamy and guaranteed to keep you glued to the page. Essence, Book 1, Septima, by Nick Breaker. Go pick it up today. ThirdScribe.com is the place to go if you love books, or if you're a writer and want to connect with other writers, or you want to find readers for your books. ThirdScribe.com can help you get started. You can join for free and meet some of your favorite writers, or you can set up a basic author website for free, and then there's multiple levels of help and support that you can get from ThirdScribe.com. I love these guys. I love what they're doing. Go visit ThirdScribe.com today and let Rob and the good folks help you get started. Also, Chronicle World's B-Movie is the latest Future Chronicles edition, book 16 in the Future Chronicles. This book is awesome, and it's been climbing up the charts since it released just this past week. Mummies and giant robots, werewolves and killer koalas, plague creatures and demonic clowns. They're coming, they're hungry, and they're not human intolerant. In this title, and the acclaimed Future Chronicles series of speculative fiction anthologies created by award-winning author Samuel Peralta, the destination is the B-Movie, the realm of the outlandish and the macabre, the strange and the unexpected. Go pick up B-Movie, Chronicle Worlds today. Thanks to all our sponsors. At the end of the show, as always, we're going to have a audio clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have one of my all-time favorite guests on the show back for a third time. Craig Johnson, the author of the Walt Longmire Mysteries, joins me again. We kind of have a standing date here in the fall. The last 2 years we have we've done around Halloween, and I'm super excited to have Craig back to talk about his brand new book, The Western Star, and all things Longmire. Welcome to the show, Craig.
Hey, good to be here. Third's a charm, right?
That's what we hear anyway. We'll find out. Craig, I've been reading the new book, The Western Star, and the last time we chatted, you told me just a little bit about kind of the idea that you had for The Western Star. Give everybody a little bit of update as to what's going on with Walt Longmire these days.
Well, this one, is once again, like try to do something a little bit different with each book. But, once you get into like a dozen or so books, like, you're going to repeat maybe some small things like that, but you certainly want to try and make sure that you're doing something new for the reader's sake. And this one's no different. I actually used a little bit of a trick that I'd used before, which was kind of a split narrative kind of deal. with Another Man's Moccasins, where there were two stories like that. They're what I tend to refer to as the Ron Popeil mystery novels, where you get two for the price of one. But it's actually, you divide the narrative up between two time periods. And for me, the excitement in this one was that we went back to a period in time when Walt was actually just a deputy, just a lowly deputy in the service of Lucian Conley, who was the sheriff of Absaroka County in 1972, and just been hired, as opposed to nowadays when we have the venerable sheriff, who's been the sheriff for a number of decades. And so it was fun to go back and forth between those two time periods, something that I'd done before in Another Man's Moccasins. But this one's a little bit different in the sense that it's not two mysteries combined by information like that, and because the two stories do separately, they're separate stories, but they do need to be connected, I think. And in this one, it's actually more of a mystery and a thriller. The mystery portion is the older part, which takes place in 1972 and takes place, of all places, on a train. The premise of the book is that from 1948 to 1972, the Wyoming Sheriff's Association held its annual meeting on a train that went from Cheyenne all the way across the state to Evanston and back. And then the more modern storyline like that, which is the results of this actual storyline, and an attempt by the powers that be to try and have a compassionate release for a prisoner that Walt made sure went to prison like that, and is fighting any kind of release like it. And so it's kind of an exploratory also on the whole mythos of Walt Longmire, in the sense of why is Walt not wanting to let this person out of prison? There has to be some kind of a reason here. And of course, the culprit in the first part of the book is the one that is the one that's trying to get out of prison, like in the latter part of the book. And the book kind of jumps back and forth between the two periods in time like that. But it's actually kind of a fun book to write, and hopefully a fun book to read.
Yeah, the Western Star. You've got this great train motif that's going on there. My grandfather was a signalman on the railroad, and I remember as a kid, those these big machines that were going somewhere, and the idea of that going across the country, and it's just this really strange feeling that you get from them that you don't get from cars or trucks. I don't know what it is. It's just weird romanticism around it. Do you have any anything like that when you were a kid? Did trains hold anything that kind of resurfaced with you when you were writing this book?
Oh, absolutely. Like that. I mean, for a number of different reasons. Like it. I mean, I can remember, a period in time when I was about, 6 or 7 years old when I actually jumped on a train, because it was, going someplace, and I thought I needed to go someplace too. Like that, much to my parents' chagrin. Like that, I traveled 287 miles like that before a switchman saw me and pulled me off, and they called my family, and they came and got me, and it was not a happy ride home, those 287 miles, nor was it a happy mother who was waiting for me when I finally got there. But yeah, I think that, that the trains are those things that just, they stay with you. It is a mode of transportation that has a romance and a beauty all to itself. I mean, one of the things I might have not, mentioned is the fact that when Walt gets ready to climb on the Western Star, he's gone through the newsstand there at the Cheyenne Railroad Depot, like that, and picks up a roll of Reed's candies, a roll of those, you might remember, and then also a paperback book. And as he's climbing on board the train, there's a sheriff coming along behind him, and the paperback falls out of the back of his pocket, and the older sheriff picks it up and looks at it, and it's a copy of Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. And he looks at Walt and says, "You studying up, youngster?" And Walt says, "No, sir, I just, since I got back from the war, I need to have a book with me all the time." And he says, "Well, he says, she pretty much had this whodunit thing figured out, didn't she?" And Walt says, afraid I don't understand." And he says, "Well, there's only so many ways you can go with it. He did it, she did it, they all did it, nobody did it." Then he looks at Walt and says, "Have you read this book yet, youngster?" And Walt says, "No, sir, I haven't." He says, "Well, we'll talk when you're done." And so it does reminisce, back to that, that bygone era of, especially of luxurious train travel. They're kind of going through a transitionary period, early 1970s, going more towards Amtrak than they were the luxuries of train travel at that point in time. And it's a changing of the guard to a certain extent, a changing of the time period, which is always an interesting time period for me to write about when those type of things are changing. And this is a luxurious train, like with fine china and white linen tablecloths, and the wooden siding on the insides, like big velvet curtains swagged back, and fine food and all these type of things. And so it's a little bit of a different world than what Walt has contended with before. And that it also it kind of is an analogous usage of space like that, because the majority of the books that I've written have been written in the open spaces of Wyoming, so there really isn't much of a compression as far as physical space is concerned like that. But in this book it is. I mean, Walt is a big guy like that, and he's kind of confined and trapped within the space of this hurtling behemoth, this train that's that's speeding across Wyoming and back. And it makes for kind of a compressed kind of environment for the storyline, which I think is a little bit different than anything that I've done before.
I love the hat tip, if you will, to Murder on the Orient Express, and this year's the anniversary of the first publishing of Murder on the Orient Express, I believe. Was that intentional for you at all, to give a little homage to the kind of book that kicked off the murder mystery?
Oh, absolutely. Especially if you're going to do one that takes place on the train.
Right.
I mean, you can't do a mystery that takes place on a train and not tip your Stetson to Dame Agatha. It would be unwieldy of me to attempt to try and do something like that. So especially whenever I'm using something as a literary jumping off point, as a catalyst for one of the books, it's really important to me to make sure that I make that nod, and acknowledge the fact that, of course, I'm aware that this has been done before, like that, and probably will be done again. But I'm going to try and do it in my particular way. And and I think that's across the board. With every single book that I write, I'm always going to try and at least give credit where credit's due.
Right. What were the challenges? I know you talked about the limited space of the train, the physical space that you put Walt in. But you also have a bit of a different cast of characters because of the physical space limitation. What was it like writing? And of course, there's always new characters and stuff, but you really put Walt in out of his zone all the way around in this book. What were some of the challenges in writing that?
Oh, well, the big thing, of course, is just the basic, formation of the book, in the sense that, here's poor Walt, who's a young deputy on board a train, that's basically, full of sheriffs. Like, he's kind of like the lone Indian, on this train full of chiefs, and so, it's interesting to watch as his credibility and his talents as an investigator, kind of start, mounting themselves as this investigation goes on. And as Lucian says, he might be one of the best, lawmen to ever come out of Wyoming. And so, it was interesting for me to see that kind of an evolution, in the character himself. It was also interesting for me too, like that, because, I'm not a big one, one of the ways that I think an awful lot of writers, and a lot of movie writers and screenplay writers and all that kind of have a tendency to do, kind of a cheap thing where, they make the cops the bad guys, and I'm just not aware of that being the case most of the time, like that, and so I try and avoid that at all possible, and that's difficult when you're, got a train full of sheriffs, and somebody's a murderer. Like, you're going to have to deal with the fact that, like, it might quite possibly be, one of them. Like, and so it's kind of interesting to develop that as far as that's concerned. And then, then the big thing is also the period aspects of the book. I mean, I'm writing a book that takes place, at least half of it in 1972. And, that's a challenge, like, because that's not that long ago. And I think, you have to try and do that with a light hand. I think you can overdo that very easily to where you're constantly, reminding people that it's 1972, and I don't think you really need to do that. People in 1972 didn't stand around going, well, it's 1972. Well, it's 1972. It's happens to be 1972. So you kind of have to, avoid that trap as much as possible, but still make sure that you get the feel and the language and, the kind of the customary aspects of, the culture and the society that make up a time period.
You told me this wonderful story before, Craig, about writing those first two chapters of The Cold Dish, and even talking to the local sheriff and talking about how you had this idea for a murder mystery and it's based on the sheriff, and then you talk about all of the busyness of life that kind of took over like it does for all of us, and then opening that desk drawer one day and seeing those two chapters of Cold Dish and realizing that 10 years had gone by. Since then, when you finish that book, I think the Western Star is your 13th book now.
Mm-hmm.
So that has not happened again to you. It doesn't seem like you have been pointing forward and full steam ahead down the tracks. Do you ever deal with I hate writer's block because that's not a real thing. But do you ever deal with the especially the busyness of being a writer and being as successful as you are, and all of the trappings that come with it? There's podcast interviews, there's there writers conferences, there's book tours, and all of that stuff. Does the stuff of writing ever get in the way of the writing?
Not really. I have to be honest and say, not really, because simply, I don't know, for me, the writing is always going to be the most important aspect of what it is that I do, because without the writing, all the rest of it kind of falls away pretty quickly, to be honest. As far as the writer's block thing is concerned, I'm a big one for doing outlines on books in the sense that it doesn't allow you to have writer's block, because all writer's block really is just not knowing what happens next. Well, if I've got a good, strong outline, I always know what's going to happen next. And for me, the joy of the writing is probably what it is that keeps me going more than anything else. I really do enjoy what it is that I do for a living, and if I had that taken away from me, I'd really be a sorrowful human being, I've got to tell you. And so, for me, it's an important part of my daily life to a great extent. And and the joy that I get from that, I don't think I would ever be able to stop doing it, to be quite honest. And I think as far as the first book was concerned, you're always going to be out there, basically swimming in the ocean with no land in sight, when you're writing your first book, because you never really know if it's ever going to get finished, if you're ever going to find an agent, if you're ever going to have anybody publish it, or anybody's ever going to read it or anything like it. And so it's a great act, a great leap of faith to attempt to write that first book. But then by the time you get to the second one, hopefully, you've already got an agent, you've already got a publisher, you've already maybe even got a readership, that follows, what your character is going to do, and what, especially if you're writing a series of books. And I think that takes an awful lot of the weight off, to be honest, because you're actually at that point writing for something. You're writing for somebody, and I think that makes the labors a lot easier, to be honest.
Where do you do your writing, Craig? Because you are not just a writer, but you're a rancher, and you live on a working ranch. So do you have a special place where you do your writing, or how does that work for you?
I do, and I'm in it right now. As a matter of fact, I have a loft in my house, that's a little bit up and away and kind of removed from the seat of power down there where the kitchen is, and the telephones and everything else, and so what it does is it kind of gives me a little bit of insulation here in the house, to be able to kind of focus on what it is that I want to do. I always know that when I come up into the loft, I'm coming up into the loft mostly for for writing purposes. And so it's a designated space for that. And I just I love the place where I get to look out the window to the north towards the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. If I walk out on the balcony here, I can look to my left and see the Bighorn Mountains, and if I look to the east, I can see the Powder River Basin stretching out, and so for me it's kind of a magical place that provides me the environs that I need to be able to do what I need to do to write. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that I haven't, had to graduate in that. I mean, whenever I first started out writing, I needed to sit at my desk, with my cup of coffee and, my perfect surroundings and all of that. But, as time goes by, like a lot of the things that you mentioned, and then the tours, and then, even the foreign tours, if you're fortunate enough, your books get translated into, foreign languages, then, if there's success, then, you're going to be going overseas for foreign tours, and I do a lot of that. And so, I have to be able to write in other places too. If I'm sitting in a train station, in France, or if I'm sitting in an airport in Germany or whatever, I need to be able to, sit down and write and not let it get in the way of that happening. It's kind of important. To be able to continue doing that. But, once again, I'm making it sound like, it's such drudgery, I have to jump in and do this no matter where I am or what I'm doing. But, it's life for me. It's the joy of my life, to be able to do this, and to be able to do it anywhere.
Well, Craig, it's not that it's drudgery, it's just not holding that writing space as precious. It's the ability to do it wherever, not that you have to do it wherever.
Oh, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right about that. It's just got to, it's got to come naturally. And I think, that the more you do it, like anything else, I'm a firm believer when I'm talking to writing students, I'm always telling them that, look, the important thing is to get out there and write. That the time of day or where, the location or anything like that doesn't really matter. What you really need to focus on is making sure that you do right. That's the important part, because it's one of the key elements of trying to get better. That's what we're all shooting for as writers, is trying to be a better writer. No matter how good you are, you always want to try and be a little bit better than maybe you were. And that only comes through the act of writing. You can study writing, you can talk about writing, you can do all those things that come along with that. But until you sit down and put your butt in the chair and start writing, well, that's when it starts really getting better.
Right. You mentioned that you're a pretty heavy outliner, and in reading your books with the amount of reveals and twists and the way that you keep carrying the story forward and keeping the reader guessing all the way through, then it's obvious that your books have a lot of planning in them, because you couldn't do the things that you do by just flying by the seat of your pants. There may be some stories that are served that way, and some writers that can do that, but you don't get the level of tension that you can carry through like you do in your books without planning out ahead of time. So when you have the idea for a new book, and I know you mentioned before that some of the idea for the book comes from the season that it's set in, and how the Longmire books kind of alternate seasons of the year, and some of that will inform the story. But when you get an idea of, okay, this is what I'm going to put Walt in the middle of this time, how long does that outlining process take, and how much do you dedicate to that front end of the book before the actual writing starts?
Probably about a year, to be honest with you. Because you want to work on the book as much as you possibly can, and have all the the trouble troubles ironed out before you actually sit down and start working on it. And I think that with that process too, I mean you really want to explore as much of that storyline and see what it is that you're dealing with as much as you possibly can before you sit down and start writing that first sentence of the book. I mean, you really want to know what you're getting into. You really want to understand and get the ramifications of what it is you're dealing with from the get-go. And you really kind of need to do that before you sit down and start writing like that, because the joy and exuberance of composing, whenever you're writing a book, is one thing like that, but the drudgery, as you referred to it, as the work is concerned, well, you got to get that done. You got to get that stuff finished like it. And so the more of that you have finished and done before you get started writing on that book, the better shape you're going to be before it's all over with. Why not save your time of not having to wrestle with a bunch of typography like that, within that book, when you don't really have to, is one of the goals, I think. But I'll start doing research, on a book about a year in advance, before I start writing that book. And I'll be hammering away, on it like that, so that by the time it rolls around and it's actually time to start, writing that book, generally I'm chomping at the bit, ready to go. And that provides a momentum, I think, especially for the beginning of a project as large as a novel.
Does the outline ever change in the middle of the writing? Does Walt or Henry or someone ever change the story on you in the midst of it?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, I think that's one of the things you also have to be open to. You have to be open to the idea that there are going to be improvisational moments. There are going to be moments, when you're writing the book that something's going to happen along the way, like that. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that that writing a novel in many ways is kind of like going to a place you've never been. You think you've done all the research, you've looked on the internet, you've read all the guidebooks, you've watched the documentaries and all that kind of stuff, but you haven't been there, so it's kind of important, to, see the place where you're going and see the topography, of that novel, before you commit, to a lot of things. And so for me, like that, I think, you have to be open to the improvisational moments where things might change, where you may decide to go in some different directions, like that, as, all of that information becomes more evident to you in the writing of that book. It all kind of, falls into place at that point in time, like that. And sometimes that can be some of the most exciting stuff. It can sometimes be some of the most exciting things that you're going to be writing about in your book. Simply because, it's things that you hadn't thought of before, but now that you're in the midst of it, well, now you have thought of it.
You mentioned in writing The Western Star that you did not like the idea of just automatically making law officers the bad guys, and even though that may be a popular sentiment, today, that was not your experience, and I appreciate that. Don't take the cliche just because it's the easier or maybe even the obvious thing. One thing that I really love about your writing, Craig, is that you handle characters in a very real way, and especially the relationship between Absaroka County and the Indian Reservation, and the people on both sides of that, and they're very real people. And while the Indian Reservation has all of its own challenges and all of that, it would be very easy to make all of the characters that live there the martyr, and that they are oppressed always and never wrong, or the other way with the folks in the county. And you paint these characters very real. They all have good points. They all have bad points. They're all just real human beings. What are the challenges of creating characters that don't become cliche and don't become stereotypes and don't become just poster children for whatever sentiment is going on at the time?
Oh, I think the big thing is that I actually live in Walt's world. I mean, that's the big thing. Again, it's it kind of holds my feet to the fire. Like I mean, I'm right here on the Wyoming-Montana border. With the Northern Cheyenne and Crow Reservation to the north, and so I have an awful lot of Walt's world, that I deal with, on a day-to-day basis, and that's kind of important. That's kind of important, the totality of the books. Like I mean, the great quote from not Wallace Stegner, but rather Studs Terkel, like that he said, nothing ever happened nowhere. I mean, you really kind of have to be aware of, your environs. And I think that when you love a place and you write about it, one of the key elements there is that place requires of you a certain honesty, or else it all kind of starts falling apart very quickly. And so for me, it's essential to try and have and be as honest as I possibly can be. I'm getting ready to go on a tour de France here just at the beginning of next month. And, I got asked, about Wyoming, and the American West as a whole, by a newspaper this morning I was doing an interview with. And, to me, I told them, I said, the worst thing that could ever possibly happen would be if you were to jump on a plane and fly to America and land in Wyoming and get out and walk around and look around and say to yourself, this is nothing at all like what's in Craig Johnson's books. For me, it's kind of essential, that I try and be as honest as I can be about, the place that I call home. I have to show the bad with the good. It's important that it all be part of the honesty of what it is that I'm trying to portray. And, and the characters are, going to be an extension of that, because, they are formed, by the environs that they live in. Walt Longmire would be a very different man if he was, a detective in Chicago, or a boat captain in Florida, or, a football player in California or whatever like that. But he is a Wyoming sheriff, and there's a certain amount of baggage, I think, that comes along with that also, to be honest. I think that, whenever you're dealing in any genre, whether it be Western or mystery or, science fiction, romance, or even literary fiction, it really doesn't matter. There's always going to be a certain amount of baggage that comes along with those things. And I think trying to deal with that baggage as honestly as you possibly can, with as much humor as you possibly can, then I think you've got a fighting chance of trying to write something that's true.
You talked about that your books have become popular overseas, and you get the opportunity to travel, and you go into France and other places. What are some of the comments that you get from people in other countries, about your portrayal of Walt and these mysteries, and maybe does it change what they think of of our great country?
Well, I think of all of the ambassadors we could have, Walt Longmire is not a bad one. Like he's
Right.
actually, he's intelligent, he's tenacious, he's good-hearted, he's tough. There's a poetry to him, like that, and a knowledge to him that I think is very telling, and sometimes against stereotype, because there's the whole stereotypes of the American West, of the cowboy, of the cop, of all those things like that, and you're always going to be at odds with some of those things, in a general rule like that. And so for me, it's fun to go against those stereotypes, especially the stereotypes that have been established for such a long period of time. I mean, there was this guy by the name of Buffalo Bill Cody who ran around all over the world doing these Wild West shows, and I think is really, in many ways, for better or worse, kind of responsible, for these emblematic, romantic imageries that, the rest of the world has to do with the American West, and so it's fun, for them to have, a knowledge that they do look at, and then to read the books, in a modern day and contemporary West, and see how they match up and how many times that they don't match up with, what might be the preconceived notions that they might have. One of the questions I got in the newspaper article, this morning was that there seemed to be an awful lot of guns in the books like that, and there seemed to be, is that a commentary on the amount of guns, that are in American society? And I kind of had to, kind of say, well, they're murder mysteries, and and Walt is a sheriff, so he kind of makes his living, with a gun kind of strapped onto his hip there. If Walt were an accountant in Sheridan, Wyoming, then no, there probably wouldn't be as many guns, involved in the storyline. So I don't think that that's particularly the case, that we're, in many ways, obviously there are situations that we need to be dealt with, as far as a gun-carrying society is concerned, like that. But I think it would probably not work very well for Walt if he didn't have his gun an awful lot of the time. So.
Well, Craig, growing up in rural Mississippi, I can remember in high school, when deer season was in, or rabbit season, whatever, we would drive to school in our pickup trucks, and everybody had a rifle or shotgun or both in the back window on the gun rack. And, it was just part of life. And, and sometimes you'd go out with the principal to the parking lot of the school and show them your new rifle you got for Christmas. And, we never had an incident, thank God, but, some things are just part of the ingrained culture, and it's not necessarily a commentary on anything. It's just the way things are. And, I think,
absolutely. And I think you're also talking about the differences between, an urban society and a rural society. I got asked one time, by a bookseller, well, do you have guns in your home? And I'm like, well, yeah, I do, but I mean, it's a ranch, so,
right.
Obviously there are, there's a reason, for me to have a 410 shotgun, for rattlesnakes, and I mean, it's one of those things where, it's just according to what part of the country that you happen to be in, or, what kind of a lifestyle you lead like that, or geographically, what the things that you deal with, so, for me, it's I think it's an honest portrayal of the way that, that Walt lives his life like that. But then again, once again, Walt is in law enforcement, and so the majority of the characters of the sheriff's department are going to have guns on them pretty much all the time, just simply because it's part of the job, it's part of the job. And I don't think there's any way around that. That particular trope it just has to be.
Right. In telling Walt's stories, you have become one of the great modern reporters on kind of the state of the American West. What do you see as how have you seen the American West change in the time that you've been ranching and writing? And do you see any troubling trends that maybe people aren't aware of?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, that's one of the things for me that's, it's a continuation of, the process of writing the novels in many ways, is that, I snatch newspaper articles everywhere I go. I grab, small town newspaper articles to get ideas, for storylines, simply because I want Walt, to be kind of connected, to the realities of the American West. I don't really want him chasing Al-Qaeda in Crook County. I don't want Walt on a cruise ship, those type of things. I want Walt dealing with the things that, Western sheriffs actually deal with. And so an awful lot of the time, whenever there's a social element in the books, it tends to come from newspaper articles. I mean, the book that I hate to keep going back to the French thing like that, but that's just the previous interviews I was doing this morning was about Serpent's Tooth, and they were asking me about these splinter Mormon sects, and they were asking me about the problems with the Lost Boys, these 14 and 15-year-old boys that are being kicked out of these Mormon polygamist splinter groups simply because the older men want access to the younger girls, and so, you're dealing with a lot of societal aspects that might be fringe elements, but nonetheless are still, a part of the culture and the society. And I think that, that when you stop dealing with those type of topics, those type of issues like that, then you're kind of surrendering yourself, to formula writing, where it's like, oh, the power plant at the end of town, somebody's planning on blowing it up, that kind of foolishness. And so, for me, I want Walt, dealing with the things, that Western sheriffs deal with. And that doesn't mean that it won't be, any less topical or any less controversial. So for me, the latest book, The Western Star, deals a lot with the litigious aspects, of compassionate release. One of the remarks that Walt makes, which is very against his character, which is, he's very, he's a very forgiving, very humane person, but for some reason, he does not want this individual to get out of prison, doesn't think that this person deserves to be out of prison, and actually makes the statement that, this person killed multiple individuals, and received, for that crime, multiple life sentences. Who didn't think that they weren't going to die in prison? That's part of the sentencing. You don't, get a free get out of jail card, after you've done, 30 or 40 years in prison, after you kill, multiple people. That's just not the way that it works. And so, it kind of puts you in a position, where sometimes you're doing a little bit of controversy, but I think that that's where the best writing is going to come from, trying to come to terms, with some of those controversial issues. And that's something that, that I will continue to do no matter what, no matter if it falls on the right or wrong side, of, whatever the reader happens to think. I'm hoping that they will be open to the idea that, that this is an exploratory of ideas, and that the books are not just, clever whodunits that by the time you get to the end, there are, 30 people stacked up like, cordwood. It's kind of important to have something to say, to have a message.
Well, but you do it in such a way, Craig, that that it doesn't come off like a sermon. There are some extremely popular writers, and but you can always count on, and we won't name names or anything, but you can always count on there's a chapter or two of exposition, and there's their agenda is coming through, and
the sermon or the lecture chapter.
That's right. And you can count on it. And you're like,
oh
okay,
yeah,
we got to get this. But there used to be a time where we could have open dialogue and discussion, and sometimes we just wouldn't agree, and sometimes you would listen to another person and you might be persuaded to think a little differently, and that's what I love about the way you portray some of these things, is you don't beat people over the head with it, and you kind of leave it out there like, this is something we ought to at least think about and talk about. And that seems to me to be something very important to you, is just to get the dialogue open about it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, obviously, whenever I'm trying to do these type of things, I'm trying to do it with a certain sleight of hand, and I'm also trying to do it, with a sense of humor like that, because there's no mind as hard to get through to as one that's being lectured. I mean, none of us like being lectured to like that, and having something shoved down our throat. That's just not an enjoyable, discourse. And so for me, it's important to use a light hand, to develop those ideas and to, get those ideas across like that without trying to hammer them into someone like that. And I think that, the characters are the element there. I mean, it's how the characters respond, to the information that you're trying to get across, and realizing that, that even the characters are going to have, different responses, to different subject matter than yourself. I always laugh a little bit whenever somebody, writes me with a certain amount of umbrage, about something or a position that one of the characters took, in the book, and I'm always writing them back and going, okay, just so the position that character took in that book may not be my own personal belief, and so, you have to understand that, one of the important things, that you're trying to do with any kind of well-grounded literature is trying to show all points, trying to show all perspectives, and sometimes people believe that every single perspective in the book would have to be yours, and that'd be all right if you were schizophrenic, but other than that, I think it would be a little bit difficult to pull off. So.
Sure it would. Craig, we have to talk for a minute about Longmire on Netflix. I think a lot of readers probably first discovered Walt through the TV show, and we got news a week or two ago that on November 17th, my birthday, I'm taking that as a personal gift to me, the new season is dropping. They say this is going to be the final season. What are your feelings about that?
Oh, I think, whenever we went into, the idea of a television show, you always knew that there was going to be a lifespan involved with anything like that. It's just a given like that. I mean, most television shows run usually about 6 or 7 seasons. We were extraordinarily fortunate in the sense that, we got canceled as the highest rated scripted drama on the network that we happened to be showing upon. We were the highest rated scripted drama they ever had, and they canceled us. And so generally, that's usually the end. Whenever you get canceled in Hollywood, that's pretty much the end. You don't tend to come back from the dead, as it were, like in programming. But we had something miraculous happen like that, and there were enough people that really enjoyed seeing the television show that kind of assembled this Longmire posse that pushed wholeheartedly to find another home. And we were fortunate enough to have a kind of a godfather in Peter Roth, at Warner Brothers Studios, like that he really believed that this was a good show and that it had a really good, strong audience and deserved another shot at being televised. And about that time, there was this strange new business starting up, streaming television, and I remember everybody saying, "Oh my gosh, streaming! They're going to show your television show on the computer? Well, that's never going to work. That's the end of your show." Well, that was this little group called Netflix, which has now turned out to be, one of the biggest gorillas in the Hollywood production room, and so we've had another 3 wonderful seasons on Netflix, and we're just kind of coming to a bit of a close as far as that's concerned, but there's no guarantee that this will be the absolute ending. I mean, this is, it's coming to an end, for this particular incarnation, of Walt Longmire, but then again, we've also heard all of these rumors of the potential for television movies and that type of thing, and so we'll see what happens. We'll have to wait until November 17th, and that 6th season actually hits the ground and gets some traction, with some rubber on the road like that. But then we'll see what happens. Who can say?
You talked about this particular kind of incarnation of Walt that's in the TV show, and the Walt of the TV show is a little different than the Walt of the books. It's some of the circumstances around Walt are different. He's the age is a little different, and there are differences in the two Walts. Did the TV show affect the books at all? Or have you always kind of kept these two as, these are two separate entities, and they're each on their own path, and I'm happy with both of them.
Well, I think it's for me it's always been separate but equal universes as far as that's concerned. The elements that that have made a success of the television show and the elements that have made a success of the books are sometimes separate but equal, and what works for one doesn't necessarily work for the other and so I kind of went into the whole process with my eyes open and kind of knowing that the television show was going to be a little bit different from the books, and one of the statements and I guess one of the first altercations that I had with the producers of the television show was when they told me, they said, well, we're thinking about making Walt and Henry about 10 years younger than they are in the books, and I had the immediate redneck cowboy, writer response where I said, well, why is that, Pilgrim? And their response was, well, we'd really like this TV show to run for about, 8 or 10 years, and we'd rather not have Walt and Henry on walkers by the time we get to the end, and so, I kind of had to be open to the idea. I had a hard time arguing that point, and so, I think I kind of went in with my eyes open and realized, that there were going to be some differences between the two, and you kind of have to trust, the people that, that you get in partnership with. That's the big thing. Hollywood is no different from any other business in the sense that you try and, work with the very best people that you can, and then do the hardest thing to do, which is leave them alone, not try and micromanage all the way from Ucross, Wyoming. I mean, it would be kind of ludicrous, for this cowboy, in northern Wyoming to try and tell all of these producers and directors and everybody how to do their job. They have a track record, a very successful track record of all the shows that they've done. And so, the best thing you can do in Hollywood's the same thing as anywhere else. Get the best people you can do and then leave them alone. They'll let you know if they need any information from you, like that. And as a creative consultant on the show, they've kind of kept me in the loop, with the whole entire process. But yeah, I do look I do look at the Walt of the television show and the Walt of the books as being, two, different, breeds of cat.
Well, since you told us earlier in the show that you kind of work and plan on a book for about a year before it's ready to go, and the Western Star is out now. Are you working on book 14 now?
Oh, absolutely. And I do find myself, though, in a unique kind of position that I don't normally find myself in, because it's usually at this point that I can start telling you about the next book and give you a little bit of a synopsis and a rundown of what it's going to be like and the locales and all of that. But in this particular situation, I can't. For the first time in 13 years, I find myself at a point where I can't really talk about the next book without giving away a great deal of the end of this particular book, The Western Star. I can tell you about the title of the book, and promise that, it will continue with the momentum that was started with The Western Star, like that. But as far as actually giving you all the information about the book, I actually can't. The title comes from Albert Camus, like that, and it's Depth of Winter, that I was surprised to discover that even in the depths of winter, I held within me an eternal summer. And that's the title of the next book, is Depth of Winter. So it should be somewhat epic and interesting for the readership, I hope.
I love it. I love it. Craig, thank you so much for being generous with your time and for bringing us this beloved character and keeping us in great reading material. Thanks for taking time to come on the show.
Oh, absolutely. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Mather steepled his hands. You asked to join us once? Hedwig leaned forward, eagerly. The Appointed. Does that appeal? Yes. Do you even know what we do? My grandmother used to say that you control the world. That's not far off. But why? To what end? I don't know. Power? Pour me a bourbon. Mather reached into his briefcase and produced a file folder. I want to tell you one story. Have you ever heard of Centralia, Pennsylvania? No. He produced a photo for Hedwig's inspection. Spring of 1962. A pretty little town, wasn't it? Whitewash and ticky-tacky, pastel housewives and perfect lawns. A mining community, mostly. Coal. He turned over a second photo. A lovely young woman. There was a single witch in Centralia named Anna Lively. Anna had a green thumb. She could make her garden grow, whisper to a flower, and send it shooting from the ground like that. Just lovely. But she was discovered. That spring, a boy named Bobby Avery received a Bell & Howell Zoomatic movie camera for his 11th birthday. Bobby amused himself by filming his neighbors, sometimes without their knowledge, through windows and over garden fences. 12 seconds of film. Just a girl and her garden patch and one swiftly blooming rose. It killed the town. Bobby showed it to his friends. Children believe readily. Bobby was the first to die. Parents looked into it, watched the film themselves, and they began to die. Anna disappeared. Perhaps they attacked her. Perhaps she escaped. But even in her absence, knowledge of a true witch was running wild through the population, as if Anna had beckoned it herself to grow verdant and spread. The great curse had killed 64 Centralians by the 1st of June. The footage was offered to a national news organization. That was the precipice. It might have been shown in prime time, between Leave It to Beaver and My Three Sons. We came very close to another worldwide calamity, but we were fortunate. One of our own was in place at the network. He alerted his superiors, and they ended the situation. Do you know how? I'm afraid to ask. Mather laid down another photo. This is Centralia today. It was an aerial view of a forest. Endless trees and underbrush cut through by lanes of pavement. Just a maze of cracking asphalt, like the foundations of Sodom, ripped bare by the wrath of God. Only a cemetery remained, on a hill overlooking the former town. A white marble angel stood among the graves, grieving for the ruins below. like Lot's wife, turned to salt. You destroyed the whole town? Not I. This was well before my time. But, yes. Just as you'd cauterize a wound to stop a patient from bleeding to death. We blamed it on an uncontrollable mine fire, deep below the earth. We actually set the coal burning, in case someone investigated. It burns today. Touch any of those streets and you'll find them hot, the asphalt melting as if the town sat just above perdition. It's not something we're proud of, but it was necessary to save the world. Centralia, Pennsylvania, and everyone who'd seen that film had to be sacrificed. Mather collected the photos. So, that is why the appointed exist, and that is what we do. Still want to join?